'Twas the nights before Christmas. Despite last-minute stress, few were delivering except Walmart Express.
Stockings were hung by the fireplace with care, knowing in about an hour stuffers would soon be there.
On to the road, Walmart Express delivery went. Chock full of wondrous things in the St. Nick of time sent. Let's go!
Get express delivery in as fast as an hour, even on Christmas Eve. Orders must be placed by 4 p.m. local time on 12/24. Subject to availability. Fees and restrictions apply.
Express delivery to y'all and to all a good night. Welcome to your Walmart.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hey, it's Austin James. Yes, I'm living with diabetes, but it doesn't have to define me. Thanks to the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor, I get real-time glucose readings throughout the day. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor is small and easy to wear, giving me the freedom to focus on my life as a parent and a musician. Now this is progress. You can get a free sensor at freestylelibre.us.
Offer available for people who qualify. Visit myfreestyle.us to see all terms and conditions. Certain exclusions apply. Data on file. Abbott Diabetes Care. For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search. Match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
Hi there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode 76 of DBR Bites. Little short, little, stuff you get. It's not like a full episode, but sometimes goes 45 plus minutes.
I want more credit than that.
Wait, you're spoiling the surprise that you're here.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. I'm Jason. I'm joined by Donald Wine. We have an extra special bonus guest with us. It is none other than Sam Klein, who is with us for the first 600 or so of these.
This is my second appearance on the show this season?
Yes, this is number 2.
Oh, man.
Stats game's going away from me.
I think I'm losing this category.
By the way, really quick, guys, I looked at the stat game, our numbers recently. Donald's going to win it going away because Donald picked Cooper Flagg and
nope, don't do that. No predictions, none of that. I don't want to hear none of that. You're not good at these, so I'm just gonna let this thing rock.
Okay, we'll wait. All right. So, folks, you should have just a short time ago listened to our preview of the Georgia Tech game that's coming up on Saturday, and you may be saying, like, why didn't you just do these two things together as one episode? Here's the deal. I think that this is significant enough. I think the conversation we're about to have is meaningful enough that it needs to stand on its own. I don't want someone at noon on Saturday or 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock on Saturday, having listened to or watched, I should say, the Georgia Tech game. I don't want them to go, oh, this Georgia Tech preview doesn't matter. What we're going to do for you now is something that Duke fans, I think, need to pay a lot of attention to and is completely separate from anything going on in terms of Duke's game against Georgia Tech. So if you're listening to this on Saturday or Sunday or whatever it may be, this is a big deal, people. All right, I'm going to get into it now. The other day, there was an article by Matt Norlander at CBS Sports where he spoke about the hiring of Bill Belichick at UNC. And what he said was the amount of money that Carolina committed to Belichick's salary, to his salary for his assistants, to NIL, to other upgrades to the football program is really significant. Like, we're not talking 10, 20. We're talking like 30, 40 million dollars. And it's money. Some of it comes from the North Carolina athletic department budget, but a lot of it comes from boosters. A lot of it comes from the wealthy people who back the program. And Matt Norlander said, how much money is there for basketball if you're putting all this money into football? And I think it's pretty easy, guys, to sort of initially say, oh, forget about that. North Carolina's always going to have money for basketball. Of course they're going to have money for basketball. I don't know that that's the case. So after reading this Matt Norlander article, I reached out to a friend of mine, a guy I know who is, I don't want to say he's not a booster of UNC, not a moneyed booster, but he's someone who he knows people around the program, that kind of thing. I don't want to get into who he is, but he's someone who understands what's happening inside the Carolina program. And he said to me that he knows for a fact that there are important, wealthy Carolina boosters who are now all in on football. And in his words, he said to me, they don't really care what happens to basketball in the short term. And I found that shocking. He said part of it is a disgust they have with Hubert Davis. And my friends, you know, he said, unfortunately, there's a little bit of racism in that. I don't want to get into that, but that's part of the reality here. But a bigger part of it is that these people who care deeply about Carolina athletics are convinced that the ACC is going to wither and die over the course of the next decade as we approach the end of the grant of rights. And that as the ACC withers and dies, football relevance is the way to get an invite to the SEC or the Big Ten. And that all that matters to them is getting that invite to the SEC or the Big Ten. And by their logic, you are either part of the Big Two or you simply do not matter and you're going to get left in the dust. And these people believe that the hoops program, Carolina basketball, is kind of toast until it joins one of these leagues, that it will not be able to compete until it joins the SEC or the Big Ten. These are people who are looking at the current state of college basketball and see the SEC dominating in a way that we haven't seen a conference dominate since the ACC in the 1980s, before either of your times. I remember it. I remember when the ACC was as dominant as the SEC is now. But the reality is the SEC is dominant now because of resources, coaches, facilities, and NIL. They're dominant because of money. And these people at Carolina believe that the hoops program can't really compete. So let's not worry about hoops for a little while. We'll rebuild it once we get that sweet SEC Big Ten money. I got a lot more on this. I think that we're looking at the beginning of a sustained downturn in North Carolina basketball, but I want to let you guys chime in at this point.
So first off, I think the first thing you mentioned is important, and you may not go there, but I will. This conversation is not had in UNC circles if Hubert Davis isn't the coach. If you need to know why, you need to ask somebody else. That is not my job. I will not waste my time on it. But there is a reason why this conversation is being had.
We all know the reason. Go ahead.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so I will leave that. Now, again, I have some stuff on this, but I am not of the opinion that UNC basketball is going away. Here's why. Each team, every team in Division I, the major teams especially, is just one deep pocket away from getting back into the game. Oregon was not doing anything in football. They were kind of relevant in football, but they weren't getting to national championships and stuff like that. Now they are number one in the country. Do you know why? Because Phil Knight gave them a blank check. And you know what they also did? They did the same thing for basketball as well. Basketball is getting back to relevance. Memphis could not do a single thing until FedEx kicked in. There's a guy down the road in Chapel Hill. I don't think he lives there anymore, but he was a pretty prominent player when he was there, who has a lot of money and is a big time supporter of the basketball team. His name is Michael Jordan. And what's to say that Michael Jordan couldn't do the same thing for UNC? The question is, would he? And that's a different question. But I do think that if you get, again, it doesn't have to be Michael Jordan. They have connects everywhere, just like Duke. They can put players in front of big companies that could give them NIL deals. And just like what we had, we have Rachel Baker, right? Who will not necessarily say, "Hey, we got X million dollars for you," but we got Nike for you. We got New Balance, Cooper. We got Gatorade. We got these big companies. We have Apple, right? If Tim Cook wants to write Duke a check, Duke would never have to worry about money again because Tim Cook could write as many checks as he wanted, right? So I think the answer, the short-term answer is, despite all that, right? Think about this. UNC was 8-20 my sophomore year with Matt Doherty. 8-20. You know what they were at that time, Jason? Relevant, because they were UNC basketball. That relevance is not going to go away for UNC just because they decide that they're going to spend their money elsewhere. And let's be real, they weren't spending their money in good ways for the basketball team. The reason why the basketball team is what it is right now is not because they weren't throwing money in. We talked about it over the summer. They were throwing millions of dollars at guys to try and get them to transfer to play at UNC. None of them decided to go. And it wasn't because of the money, because they were offering a bunch of it. I don't see that as going to happen in football, right? I don't see a bunch of guys all of a sudden just gonna be like, oh, these guys are throwing money at me. It's UNC. They're gonna be relevant. They could be, but that's not always the case. You can throw as much money as you want at these guys. If they say no and they don't come, your relevance goes with them. And I think at the end of the day, football has a long way to go to be as relevant as UNC basketball. And I think the people down there that are being short-sighted in this are the ones that are going to set their entire athletics department up for failure.
I'll tell you one thing that I strongly agree with in the minds of these boosters who Norlander is referring to in his article. I agree with the sort of general landscape assessment that if you want to be a relevant top college athletics program, not specific to any sport, but if you want to be a top program and be able to field all the sports and do all the things you want to do and have the best facilities across every sport, and that's the key, across every sport, then in the long run, you need to be in the Big Ten or the SEC. They're the only conferences that are going to be able to keep pace with each other in terms of media rights. The ACC is not keeping pace with media rights. We've covered that ad nauseum on this program, and you can read about it everywhere. Duke and all of its compatriots in the ACC make way less money today than every school in the Big Ten and the SEC, despite how mediocre they might be in basketball. Forgetting about how good the SEC is this year and has been the last couple of years, right? It doesn't matter that Vanderbilt is irrelevant in basketball and will always be. Vanderbilt basketball makes probably more money than Duke basketball does on account of the TV rights. And I think that the UNC donors have correctly diagnosed that part of it. Where I think they and that in the long run, you have to be in one of those conferences. And UNC, let's be real, would be a fine candidate for either of those conferences in a just world, perhaps, right? Big state school, generally speaking, lots of money. Not a state that either of those conferences is in, should be getting eyeballs, at least on the basketball side. I don't know about football, and that is where we come back to. The reason UNC hired Bill Belichick, the reason they're taking this huge long shot, which I would tell you, I don't know if this Bill Belichick thing is going to work for UNC. Bill Belichick hasn't worked in the college game. He doesn't know how it works. He's obviously a brilliant football mind, but you've heard a lot of the commentary about that. We don't need to repeat that either. UNC is not going to rise up out of its place as a football program without making an enormous hire and having it go well like this. Let's look at Duke's situation. Duke hired Manny Diaz, has had an unbelievable season this year. 9 wins, could get to 10 wins with the bowl game. I'm super excited about that. I'm bummed that I can't make it to the bowl game, but I am as excited about Duke football right now as I've ever been. And I am also totally honest with myself that as good a season as Duke had, and as much as we can talk about, if the ball bounces the other way for us against SMU, maybe we have a shot at the playoff. Despite all of that, I harbor no no thoughts about the possibility that Duke could have been one of these teams that gets invited to the Big Ten during the next round of realignment or into the SEC. Because Duke football doesn't draw those eyeballs. And Duke football having one great season is not going to draw those eyeballs. Colorado football hired Deion Sanders. They've gotten a ton of attention. They've got the Heisman Trophy winner. Who's talking about Colorado going to the Big Ten this year? Nobody. Mm-hmm. Nobody is talking about Colorado going to the Big Ten. And you know how much Deion Sanders has made a difference there in the conversation about Colorado going to the Big Ten? Zero, zip, zilch. It doesn't matter. Unless Bill Belichick completely kills it at UNC. Recruiting, but also making it to the playoff, winning games in the playoff. That is the bar that is going to change the mind about decision makers in the Big Ten and the SEC about inviting UNC, because you have to draw eyeballs. UNC doesn't draw the eyeballs that USC football does, doesn't draw the eyeballs even that UCLA football apparently does to get invited to the Big Ten. It doesn't draw the eyeballs that Texas does to get invited to the SEC, or Oklahoma does to get invited to the SEC. Things have to go so right for UNC to be one of these programs. I think the only way that it happens in like any universe is that this Belichick thing works, because UNC could hire any Manny Diaz. Like any Manny Diaz at Duke or at UNC is just not going to get you to that point. As a Duke fan, I've accepted this. I am fine. Duke is not going to be one of these programs. The odds that Duke ends up in the Big Ten or the SEC in the next 10 years are extremely low. And that means, Duke fans, the odds that Duke is able to field, and goes back to my original point about fielding a whole athletic program. The odds that Duke is able to field 20 some odd nationally competitive teams in all these sports that you may or may not realize that Duke even has. The odds that Duke is able to do that are very slim in the world where the Big Ten and the SEC are far ahead. Duke may not be able to, I'll list them out: men's and women's lacrosse, men's and women's swim and dive, men's and women's soccer, softball, baseball, track, all the swim. Like, there's so many sports that Duke fields that you may have never seen. The athletes are great. They're nationally ranked in almost all of these programs. They've won national championships. They've won ACC championships. They're great. These student athletes are people who we love having on campus. And if you went to Duke, you appreciate the way that added to the campus experience. That is not possible. All of it is not possible in the future where the ACC is so behind in TV rights. Carolina knows that, and what they've decided here is they're gonna take the shot. That being said, you could take all the resources and still devote them to men's basketball and still have an absolutely world-class men's basketball program. BYU signs AJ DeBonsa. Why? Because, like Donald said, they got the money to sign AJ DeBonsa, and they could do that despite BYU's not playing in the playoff, right? BYU is like a better football program than Duke and UNC is, right? Just looking at the last however many years. But no one's talking about BYU being like going to the Big Ten. It's not happening. And UNC basketball. So here's where I differ with the UNC power brokers, and then I'll let you guys react to this. I basically don't think it's possible for UNC or for Duke to end up in this tier, because we don't draw the eyeballs for football games on TV. They don't happen. Doesn't happen this week. It's probably not happening in a couple years. Maybe if Belichick kills it, it will. I doubt that it's happening, and I think that even the programs in those conferences, I think like in the long run, the programs in those conferences that don't pull their weight, the Rutgerses, the Vanderbilts, the Northwesterns, even you talk about the Indianas, like Indiana is like playing in the playoff. I could envision a world where Indiana gets kicked out of the Big Ten because they don't draw the eyeballs for football. Like, that is how cutthroat things are becoming in college football. And you know what'll happen to Indiana basketball when that happens? Nothing. Indiana basketball will have the same donors it had before, and everyone will go back to doing that. And Duke may end up being a Providence or a Georgetown or a Villanova, or name your basketball program. Gonzaga. Fine. You can be these programs. We have to admit that is probably where Duke is ending up. And I think where the Carolina donors here have it wrong is they're missing the point on this. So I agree that the only way that it potentially happens is if they knock it out of the park. And so God bless them. Good luck. I don't think it's going to work.
So just real quickly, just to add some gravitas to what you were saying about the relevance of UNC football. UNC football has had one 10-win season in the last 25 years, and that was in 2015. They have 6 10-win seasons in the last 44 years since 1980. And then the entire history of their program, they have 8 10-win seasons. Clemson, for example, Sam, when we were in school, Clemson was not good, right? they weren't great as a program. They have 10 wins in the last 12 years, and they have a chance to make that 13 in a row if they win the first game of this playoff against Texas. So again, this is it's
And Clemson, and that's a great point. And even Clemson's path to the SEC, which is where they want to end up, or to the Big Ten, even that is not guaranteed. Like, as good as Clemson has been for the life of any kid that is deciding to go to college and play football today, Clemson is a top program as far as they are concerned. And you still have not seen the Big Ten being like, let's add Clemson. Like, it is not. It is not like so cut and dry even for a program like that. And look at how lucky UNC would have to be to reach the level that Clemson has sustained for the last 10 years.
Well, so a couple things. The first one is, I think you're absolutely right that the long shot, the leap, whatever it is they're trying to do with Belichick, I think that is the way. I mean, as much as we mock it, as much as we go, looks like a desperation play. Sam, you were talking about, Duke was really within a missed extra point field goal, whatever you want to call it, against SMU from really being a potential player in the playoff. And yet, starting next season, on week 1 of the football season, North Carolina, UNC will be a more relevant team on the national landscape in terms of getting eyeballs, in terms of ESPN covering them, than Duke will be because North Carolina hired Bill Belichick. Carolina's going to be scheduled on ESPN, main ESPN, the big time, versus being on the ACC network or ESPN2 or ESPNU.
Or ACC Network Extra.
Yeah, exactly. Their football team is going to be appointment viewing the first, at least 3-4 weeks of the season while everyone goes, oh, I wonder what's happening with Belichick. So having no idea whether it's going to work or not, I agree with you. They're taking their shot. I do want to push back a little bit, Sam, on the notion that Duke and UNC and Clemson and all these other schools, that I think there's no conversation about them to the Big Ten or the SEC right now, because the Big Ten and the SEC don't want to rock the boat any more than they currently have. None of them are looking to expand at the moment. When it becomes more possible to expand, because right now you can't really expand with ACC teams. The next picks, the moment the SEC and the Big Ten decide to expand, the ACC is where they're looking first. I think we all agree about that. They're looking at Clemson, Miami, Florida State, North Carolina, Virginia, and then probably Duke. And the only reason we're not having those conversations today is because they're just not interested in expanding right now, because none of those teams can get out of the ACC grant of rights, which is a situation that's going to start to change in about 5 years or so. But
I don't see, and look, I haven't seen like the numbers and the estimates on this. I don't see any of those programs that you're talking about raising the middle of the bar for either of those conferences the way that they are today. And maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I underestimate like how much people are watching Miami or Clemson or North Carolina on TV.
Even as bad as Florida State is, I'm telling you,
Florida State, I think, is the only one that you could convince me is like definitely there. But like, turn on a UNC game. Look at how many people are at the game.
Yeah,
like they don't fill up their stadium that is not nearly NFL sized. Why would the Big Ten want that?
Well, to be
like,
clear,
people aren't watching this, and like maybe they will. Like maybe they will watch for Belichick for years. But if Belichick doesn't win 11 games, then no one's going to care, and it's going to be a weird sideshow.
I agree. You're absolutely right. By the way, Big Ten and SEC stadiums are bigger than NFL stadiums. Way bigger.
Yes, they're all right. You want to go to the biggest? You want to go to the biggest football stadiums in America? They're all in the Big Ten.
Yeah, exactly, and the SEC. Yeah, no, guys, if I can, I do want to try and bring it back a little bit toward UNC basketball, which is where we sort of started here, and the existential future of college sports conversation that we're having is one that we frankly could have had for a while. I want to bring this back again to Carolina, because just a couple days ago, Brendan Marks, friend of the podcast, a great writer who covers the ACC for The Athletic, tweeted that he thinks the entire UNC team, I mean, players who play, the entire UNC team, he believes will be gone at the end of this season. RJ Davis and Jalen Withers are out of eligibility. Ian Jackson and Drake Powell are both going to turn pro as one and done freshmen. They're both projected to be, mid first to mid second. So both those guys are apparently going to leave. Elliot Cadeau and Seth Trimble apparently are also very much thinking they want to turn pro. I'm a little unsure about that, but if you want to make that argument to me, I'm not going to say it's extremely unlikely. Brendan Marks is smarter, knows more about UNC, what's going on in the Carolina program than I do. If he says those guys are probably turning pro, they're probably turning pro. And then you're only left with, at that point, the only other guys in the rotation are the three big men who are having incredibly disappointing years. Then Alan Lubin, Jalen Washington, Cade Tyson. Those guys are the reason Carolina's losing basketball games, frankly, and the expectation is that none of them are going to want to stick around UNC after having a really disappointing year. So Carolina has 2 recruits signed up already for next year. They're both like barely inside the top 50. They're not guys you would expect to be immediate impact players. Hubert Davis, I believe, is probably going to be in a situation where he's going to need to bring in at least 5, maybe more like 6 or 7 or 8 guys in the portal at a time when, taking us back to our initial conversation, at a time when UNC boosters are putting money into football and not putting money into basketball. Good luck finding 7 or 8 quality players in the portal if you don't have $5+ million to spend on players. And I'm not sure Hubert Davis is going to have that with the resources Carolina has put toward football. So that's why I wanted the 3 of us to have this conversation about whether or not we're witnessing right in front of our faces the demise of basketball. Are they becoming, a Syracuse, a UCLA, a Louisville, teams that have incredible histories? Come on. The history of those programs, unbelievable. But they aren't relevant every single year. They make the tournament half, 2/3 of the time. Usually it's like an 8 to a 4 seed, something like that. Is Carolina going to, at least temporarily perhaps, turn into something like that versus what they've been?
No. The record is one thing, right? Like the record is look, they missed the NIT, they missed the tournament, a couple years ago and decided not to go to the NIT. We talked about that, right? And they also got to get their marketing in check, right? As we said with AJ DeBanza, their marketing ploy was, we can make you like Duke made Zion, right? Like they brought us into their marketing pitch for a guy who was not going to their school.
Hey, Donald, really quick, I want to point out something. We've talked about AJ DeBanza a couple times. It is really important to note that now that we know more about his NIL package, the Carolina offer, the $5 million offer that UNC made for him, was not from boosters. It was mostly going to be from Carolina. Thanks to the recent court ruling, schools can pay players directly as part of a revenue share kind of thing. When they pledged $5 million to AJ DeBanza, a lot of that $5 million was from what Carolina said they were going to spend from their revenue share from the school athletic department, not from what boosters. So we're already seeing, and BYU, by the way, it was all from boosters. So
right.
We're already seeing evidence that Carolina maybe doesn't have the NIL budget that folks thought they did.
But even with that, again, there are people who like UNC football. There are people who like UNC basketball. There are people who are like both, right? They're fans of both. They're fans of one team, fans of the other. There are basketball fans who don't give a damn about the football team. There are football fans who don't give a damn about the basketball team. That is the same with boosters. There are some boosters out there that only care about basketball, and it does not matter if other boosters are going to take their money elsewhere. They will keep their money with the basketball team because that is what they care about. And I also enter this. One thing that is going to happen over the next couple of years, that's already happening with Florida State, is the entry or the discussion of the entry of private equity into college athletics. They're already working with JP Morgan Chase to raise funds to get out of the ACC and also to boost their NIL profile for all of these teams if they want to remain competitive. That is something that UNC can do. Jason Belzer, this is a CNBC article. I think this quote is important. He said, quote, "Schools in the ACC and Big 12, as well as the bottom of the SEC and the Big 10 who are generating less local commercial revenue, will have little choice but to take on private capital and operation expertise, or they are all but guaranteed to be left out of the top echelon of competition in the future, end quote. That is UNC at this point, right? They can go that route, and they probably already are starting to think about it. And the other thing that I always, again, we said this with Bill Belichick. When he leaves, the manifesto goes with him. His son does not get the guaranteed cash. And if they think the Belichick experiment was a failure 3 years from now, they are not going to double down when his son takes over. And they're doing this because Bill Belichick is there. If Sam said, if Manny Diaz is or some equivalent is in Chapel Hill, they are not taking on this endeavor. It's because Bill Belichick is here and they want to capitalize off of that. But once he leaves, that manifesto goes with him. And his son's not going to get that cash guaranteed. Someone after his son is not going to get that cash guaranteed. And if they look back and they go after 3 years, all we got was a couple of 8-4 seasons, maybe they reevaluate. And in the case of NIL, here today, gone today. Whatever we are talking about today, it does not make sense to talk about tomorrow because tomorrow's going to be different. And tomorrow they may think that $20 million is enough. And then on Tuesday after Christmas, when they're returning all their gifts, they may think that $50 million is not enough. And this is how the NIL landscape is working. This is how it's changing. This is their gamble. And I mean, they have to hope that it succeeds because if it doesn't, they don't have to worry about going to the Big Ten or SEC. They won't. They won't have the money for it. They won't have the money to get out of the grant of rights deal. And that is what's important here. But at the end of the day, I think basketball is still going to be fine because there are still too many people in this country, sadly, that care about UNC basketball.
I don't know, and I wish I had a better crystal ball on this because I think Donald brings up the forces that are working against each other on this, like on this topic. That on one hand you've got the boosters who are committed to UNC becoming, or being a top college athletics program via football, which is the only way to do it nowadays because that's where you have to get the TV money from.
And by the way, really quick, Sam, I think I don't want this to be lost. The people I spoke to said this is how these Carolina boosters think they keep the basketball program relevant, that they bring it down while they invest in football, and that once they get that sweet cash from the SEC or the Big Ten, then they can invest in basketball again. So this is not people saying, I don't care about basketball anymore. It's them saying, I can't care about basketball for the moment, and I'll care about it again once we have built a football power that allows us to spend on basketball.
Once I win the Mega Millions, I'll buy Cameron Indoor Stadium. We can have our own gym. It's the same thing, in my opinion.
The fallacy of this, there's a few of them I think in that argument. One being that you can kick the basketball program down for a few years and then just immediately return it to prominence. It doesn't quite work like that. And like you said, look at all the Syracuses and the UCLAs and the Indianas of the world who've had a really hard time returning to prominence. It is a hard thing. It's a hard thing to get there. It's one thing to get there, and that's hard, but it's even harder to sustain that kind of dominance and relevance. I mean, look at what a hard time Villanova's having right now, and think about how good they were very recently.
By the way, we should do an entire podcast praising John Shire for keeping Duke at the top because we are seeing evidence left and right that
and you could argue like in some way that John Shire's been a failure because Duke hasn't been reliable number one seed in the time that he's been the coach the way that they were under Duke, when they were under Coach K, and yet he's still doing better than basically every other appointed coach in waiting type hire that has come up in the last 15, 20 years in college basketball. So it's a tough gig. Like as good a job as John Shire is doing, you could argue he still should be doing a better job based on the expectations of the program. That's how hard it is.
Yeah, wait till the season's done, my friend. Wait till the season.
Well, right. I'm certainly hoping that things work out the way that they do, but man, it's a tough needle they're trying to thread at UNC. And Donald, you bring up the whole topic of like outside capital coming into the sports. Man, if you really have to not care about what happens to the rest of the athletic department if you're going to start taking the outside money for this stuff. Because I will tell you, something that professional investors don't care about is how well the field hockey team does. That is that is irrelevant. And arguably, they may care about men's basketball. They may care about men's basketball because maybe it makes money for them, but not necessarily. And the way that we've talked about this, the way that all these athletic departments, handle their books and do their accounting and their relationship with the rest of the university and all that kind of stuff, you could argue men's basketball loses money in every one of these programs. Football is the only thing that can potentially make money, and you still got to be good. And you got to be in one of these conferences to make money as a football program. And otherwise, you are just sucking money out of this system. It is not a money-making venture to be competing with the big boys.
I will tell you, the Duke basketball, there are certain basketball programs that Duke basketball actually makes a lot of money for the university.
Certainly, yes.
And with that, hang on. We're going to take a quick break because a lot of what we've been discussing folds nicely into our next conversation, where we're going to be talking. Donald, you mentioned private equity. CNBC asked private equity experts, what programs are worth the most money today? The answer may surprise you. We'll be back in a second with that.
This episode is brought to you by AWS. Amazon Q Business is the new generative AI assistant from AWS. Many tasks can make business slow, like wading through mud. Help! Luckily, there's a faster, easier, less messy choice. Amazon Q can securely understand your business data to help you streamline tasks, like summarizing quarterly results or doing complex analyses in no time. Q got this. Learn what Amazon Q Business can do for you at aws.com/learn more.
Chronic migraine is 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine. It's not for adults with migraine with 14 or fewer headache days a month. It prevents, on average, 8 to 9 headache days a month versus 6 to 7 for placebo.
Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Ask your doctor and visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
The holidays are back at Starbucks, and there's so much to share. With classics like Caramel Brulee Latte, Peppermint Mocha, and Chestnut Praline Latte, we're celebrating everyone's flavor of festivity. Order yours in the app.
This year, Santa's bringing the power of Energizer into his workshop.
Whoa, the Energizer Bunny's got so much power. Wait, he's powered up all the toys. I think that means we're done for the year.
I love this bunny.
He's the hardest working helper the North Pole has ever seen. And he wants all your gifts to have the power of the #1 longest lasting AA battery. So this holiday season, stock up on Santa's and the elves' favorite battery, Energizer Ultimate Lithium.
All right, we're back from the break. And as we continue our conversation that is sort of the demise of UNC or the ascendancy of UNC, it could go either way, as well as money in sports and, who's worth what and all that other kind of stuff. There's a fascinating article that was on CNBC. Donald, you kind of referenced it a little bit earlier. It looked at the top 75 college programs in terms of what they're worth. CNBC spoke to a bunch of private equity people, basically said, what would you pay to buy this program, buy this athletic department? So almost all these valuations are based on revenue streams and also, what these private equity guys think, how could I maybe massage the revenue stream? How could I generate a little something extra? What's the brand value here and that kind of stuff? It will come as no surprise whatsoever that the top 15 programs, other than Notre Dame, which they list as ACC, but really Notre Dame football is independent. Other than Notre Dame, every single other team in the top 15 is a team in the SEC or the Big Ten. That sweet, sweet TV cash that they have in those conferences makes those programs worth a boatload of money. more than anyone in the ACC or the Big 12. At number 16, you get Clemson. Finally get an ACC team at number 16. And then again, it's more SEC and Big 10 teams until the mid-20s. The fourth most valuable ACC team at number 26 is the Duke Blue Devils. Revenue, they project Duke has revenue of about $153 million a year, and they put a valuation on the Duke program of $659 million. The interesting thing to note about all this is these private equity folks say Duke is more valuable than Miami, more valuable than several teams in the SEC and the Big Ten, Purdue, Indiana, Vandy, South Carolina, Ole Miss, a bunch of others. Duke's more valuable than all those programs. And fascinatingly, UNC, Carolina, who a lot of people say should be like, easily one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the ACC, doesn't come in on this private equity chart until number 40. The Carolina program is worth $539 million, according to the private equity. That's $120 million less than Duke. I've given you the numbers, gentlemen. Duke's way more valuable than Carolina. Can Bill Belichick change that?
No, he can't. No, I'm just kidding. But I see
he could. He could do it.
Yeah, but you mentioned,
but the odds are long.
You mentioned Jason Belzer. The quote that I had from him in the last segment was actually from a different article. So I don't know, Jason, might need to look into getting this guy on here because he's got some fascinating work. He advises universities on NIL and now is doing the same for athletic departments seeking private equity. And I think when we look at these numbers, first of all, it's not just the football team, it's not the basketball team, it's the entire athletic department, right? The revenues.
Yeah, but if you're talking revenue, it's football, men's basketball, women's basketball. There's no other revenue sport. I get it. There's some people who pay to go to a Duke soccer game, but there are not many of them.
I get it. My point is, when you look at some of these valuations, it also takes into effect other things, right? There's a lot of variables that goes into this. There's a conference affiliation, like the fact that someone's in the Big Ten or SEC. There's a reason why those teams are at the top because it's just like they're ranked every year, right? They get that prestige boost to it. The NIL spend. So we were talking about NIL. NIL is going to be a part of this. School subsidies, number of alumni, right? Bigger alumni, more opportunities to get revenue from those donors and from boosters and from alums and fans alike, right? The fact that Duke is on this list, right? We don't have a big alumni base. We have a huge fan base for Duke basketball, right? Millions and millions of people watch our games. No one follows any team in America on social media more than they follow Duke. They shatter those numbers, and they even shatter some of the numbers for some of the professional teams, right? They are in a league of their own when it comes to branding and marketability and the fact that you see the brotherhood on TV almost every single night. But then you also have some of these teams where this list could change very quickly, right? SMU, the reason why SMU is 65th on this list and last in the ACC, all 18 ACC teams, including Notre Dame, make this list. SMU is last in the ACC, but that's not going to stand because they are pumping so much money into their program just because they joined from the American Athletic. They now get that extra boost. They get that extra boost with NIL. They get that extra boost from all their boosters who are billionaires and their tendency to want to spend to create a winner. The Pony Express, they're trying to bring that back minus the stuff that got them in trouble. But I think a lot of this list is the NIL numbers are just merely part of the equation. And I know it's become a big deal when it comes to the players and who we get and things like that. But there's a lot of things that go into this. And a lot of it the revenue is one thing. And if you think about it, some teams make more revenue than others. But that doesn't mean they're more valuable. So yes, it includes going to basketball games. It includes going to football games. Yes, Jason, and it includes paying to go to the soccer games or paying to go to the lacrosse games. That all is revenue to the athletic department that helps boost this profile. But I think it's fascinating that also for a private school, for a very small private school, Duke and even Miami, right? Miami has had a great program in football for many years, many decades. But Duke, the basketball team, the men's basketball team has sustained what is a very small alumni base into creating such ginormous numbers of revenue for the department and spreading it out amongst all these programs that Sam and I have talked about that are super great and are competing for ACC and national championships every single year. So I think this list was great to kind of look at those numbers, but also make no mistake, these lists are changing daily. These numbers are changing daily. And as some of these, like SMU, if they win the playoff, their stature goes up, their prestige goes up, applications go up. We see that when Duke wins a national championship in basketball. All of that adds to the general prestige of a university and to the conference. And the idea is if all these tides lift, all these boats lift, then the ACC gets a bigger profile, and that helps the valuation for all these teams.
I'll tell you that the college programs that start giving away chunks of their ownership to private investors are going to have a very, very unhappy time in their futures. And this is not like, I'm not one of these people that's like, private investment ruins businesses. It's ruining this country. I don't take that view. I think there's a lot of ways in which, and I should add that I've like sort of worked in this space for the last few years. So I have, informed, but maybe not expert views on this. What does private equity try to do when they buy into a business? They try to raise the revenues and they try to cut costs. There's only so many ways you can raise revenue in a college athletic department. You can't, like, if you own Ohio State football, you can't merge it with Michigan football. That doesn't work. There's no such thing as that. Ohio State can't subsume Ohio football and get its valuation. All right, that doesn't exist. You know what you can do? And by the way, the revenue streams are fairly cut and dry. You've got a donor base that athletic departments are already pumping for money as much as they can. The TV deals are already in place, and they can't be negotiated aggressively the way that private equity would want to do. The sponsorship deals, all these kinds of things. Athletic departments are already doing this stuff. They're already trying to squeeze as much money out of this enterprise as they can from a revenue perspective. So let's talk about costs. I'm going to come back to the point I've already made. Where are the costs in the athletic department? Other programs and support staff. That's it. That's where all the costs go. The costs go towards fielding the 30 other teams that Ohio State supports, or, in Duke's case, it's like 20 some odd programs. That's the biggest cost driver for Duke athletics, and coaches' salaries and all those other things. You know what happens when private equity comes in and buys into these programs? They cut that stuff. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you say, you know what? If you're the UNC donors or anyone else, the whole point of this enterprise is for us to enjoy the football and men's basketball teams. That's fine. And that is your prerogative. It's your money. And that's how the golden rule works. But if you care about these universities, if you care about the institutions that exist around these programs, and you want them to succeed, you can't possibly think that this is a good idea for your university. It is I cannot stress enough how bad this is. And by the way, the first investors that come in and, they're going to cut all the non-revenue sports. They're going to be like, none of this is a money-making venture. We're going to get rid of it. Or we're going to turn it into, we're going to spin it off from the athletic department. We're going to put it into a different department in the university. Good luck, Duke field hockey. You're not getting any of this trickle down money anymore.
You're just taking on the field hockey teams.
Baseball, whoever. I don't care.
Yeah.
I have, I have friends that play a lot of these sports. Duke men's lacrosse, extremely successful. National championships. Good luck, guys. Like, you're not getting this money anymore. You better go raise that money from lacrosse alumni, from swimming alumni, whoever they may be. That's who's giving you money. Because, by the way, if I'm a donor and I give to Duke athletics and, Iron Dukes and all that, why do I do that? Basketball tickets. I do that for basketball tickets. I don't care if all these other programs are successful. This is what private equity will do to Duke. It's what they'll do to any of these programs, and they cannot pull the same levers here that they do with other businesses that they buy. This is an admission of defeat by any program that gets into this. And if you are participating in this race to the bottom, you will lose everything that you actually hold dear about these universities. If you're committing to this, look, you could argue that it's already gone, right? We're in the NIL world. The players are all getting paid above board, like above the table. We've just admitted that the whole thing is professional sports at this point. And I'm sure that there are people who say, you know what, this is too much for me. Clearly it's not happening en masse because they're still selling out the games and making the money and all these kinds of things. But you will see all of these things erode when you have private capital in here that functions completely differently than all the money that has been in this enterprise before. And I have pretty strong conviction that this doesn't go well for anyone. Maybe it goes well initially. Maybe you're a middling Big Ten team and you get that private investment, and all of a sudden you've got more money to spend on NIL, and you can juice things up for a couple years and get to the playoff. Long run, you're not gonna be happy about this. You're not gonna be happy about what it does to your university. You're not gonna be happy about what it does to your community. You're not gonna be happy about the experience that the players and the coaches and everyone else is having. Because, by the way, they're gonna start nickel and diming everywhere. You know how we live in the world where, like, we talk about all these spoiled college football programs with their waterfalls in the locker rooms and their fancy
massage
trips and
tables, yeah,
all that kind of stuff. Man, that is going out the window. We are back to peanut butter sandwiches in this world. You want to talk about Simon and Schuster not getting to have a holiday party this year? Guess what? Neither is Duke football. That's what you get in this world. And maybe you want that. Maybe you want to make as much money as possible in this thing, and maybe you want to have a shot at competing in that playoff. But do you really want that?
Guys, we could keep on doing this for another hour, I think. But I want to close.
You got me all revved up, man.
I know you're on, baby. I'm going to close on a question, and I want you guys can take a second and think about the answer. I want to define a successful season. I'm going to go back to the original point, the future of UNC basketball. We've strayed a little bit from that occasionally. Next 5 years. I want to think about the next 5 seasons for UNC basketball. I'm defining a successful season as an ACC title, regular season or postseason, a Sweet 16, or being a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. Those are the definitions. I think anyone would agree. You accomplish any of those 3 things, you've had a pretty darn successful season. How many? Put another
way, you can't, if you're Hubert Davis or any top coach, it's very hard to get fired if you achieve any of those things.
Exactly. Yes. Right. Excellent. That's a good standard to say. Yes. Top 4 seed, Sweet 16, regular season or postseason title in your conference. Next 5 years, how many times does Carolina achieve a successful season? Donald?
I hope 0, but I always hope. But I think in the grand scheme,
put the heart aside. I want with your head, based on all the stuff that I've been talking about, based on Brendan Marks saying no one's coming back, based on everyone saying NIL money is drying up.
I think 3, because I think it may be more of the top 4 seeds in the tournament, because again, they get a boost like no one else, right? Like they lost almost all their team last year, right? Where were they? Top 10, right? Or right outside the top 10. They were picked to finish second in the conference because people just say, oh, it's UNC, slap that label on there, contender. I think people are just going to still give it to them. And if they have a decent year, they'll probably get 3 times in the top 4 seeds of the tournament.
I think if UNC doesn't have a collective that can support buying all these players this year, I'm with Jason. I don't know that the thing is sustainable. And I know I've made this point a lot over the years on this show. If you're a high school guy, or even you're a college guy, your memory is not very long for programs being good. Like by 4 years from now, the guys who are deciding whether they're transferring into Carolina will barely remember Duke and UNC playing in the Final Four a few years ago, because they will have been in middle school when that happened.
Yeah.
And so if the collective situation there is as bad as Jason's saying it is, 1 successful season. And I don't know that Hubert wants to stick around for that kind of stuff. Whether he gets fired or not, it just becomes like, look at how stressful it seems like it's. I mean, look at how stressful it got for John Calipari to continue basically being successful every year, and now maybe the expectations are different. And as much as we clown on Carolina for being silly, Kentucky is a whole another level of silly. But they basically ran John Calipari out of town for being very successful. And Penny Hardaway's going through this in Memphis, and look at what's happened at Louisville, and I could go on and on and on. It is so hard to win these days. And Carolina apparently is not set up for it. And I wonder if they will, if they're in that world, if those donors will regret taking that tack.
So my answer is going to be, I'm tempted to say 0, but I'll go with Sam and say 1.
I thought about 2, so maybe I should go with 2 and Donald's 3 and Jason's 1, and we'll put this on the stats game 2020, 2030.
I was going to say the 3 that I have does not assume that everything remains constant. And more importantly, it does not assume that Hubert Davis is the coach for all 5 of those seasons.
Well, see, yeah, I was going to say, I think that maybe what happens is they have a few down years. Hubert, whether because he can't take it anymore or because they can't take it anymore, is gone. And the next coach that comes in, because there are Carolina fans out there right now who are saying, hey, we got Bill Belichick. Let's go take a shot at Brad Stevens. Like Brad Stevens is going to leave being GM of the... I got news for you. Brad Stevens is not leaving being GM of the Celtics. He's very good happy. At it. He's right. He's great at it. He's making a boat ton of money. In any event, they're Carolina fans who are dreaming now. And I think the one that I see happening is in like 3 years or so, after Hubert's gone, the next guy that comes in says, okay, you promised all that money to Belichick. Time to give money back to me. You're hiring me and you're guaranteeing me a certain NIL budget that allows me to put this Carolina program back where it belongs. And that's where I see them getting back into it.
I'll tell you one thing.
Next few years are going to be tough at UNC.
I'll tell you one thing that's working in their favor. They still get to play in this crap ACC.
Yeah. I will say this. I don't know that he lasts that long because because look, he's already had a couple of down years. So I don't know. Like UNC's not going to wait for 3 more. I promise you that.
I don't know. They didn't run Doherty out of town after 1 bad season.
They ran him out after 2.
The next one.
They ran him out after the next one 2 years later.
It is one thing to hire a flashy outsider for UNC football, which, they had the Mac Brown thing and whatever. UNC basketball last hired an outsider when they hired Gene Smith.
Yeah. In the 1950s.
Which was in the 60s?
No, 50s, I think. It was
in the 50s?
Before I was born.
That's a long time ago.
All right, with that, we're going to wrap it up here on the latest edition of DBR Bites. See, folks, I told you.
I can't believe you called it Bites.
I told you that this was worth having as a separate episode. I was right. This was a fun conversation. Sam Klein, thanks for joining us. Come back soon, man. We need to have you. He is Donald.
I'll be back. Yeah. If nothing else, I'll be back after the Boston College game in a month. So
there you go, man.
You can look forward to it then. Maybe I get excited because we beat the pants off of Ole Miss in the meantime.
Anything can happen, baby. All right. For Sam, for Donald, I'm Jason. Here's the Duke Band playing us out and taking us home.